Hey folks, it's Gregg Bendian here on the ProgCast, and it's always a pleasure for me to host musicians that I actually get a chance to work with and have recorded with, and feature them for you in depth conversation about our interaction, how we collaborate, all the crazy business we get up to. And today's guest is just one of my favorite musicians, and really one of the most favored, I'll say, of musicians to come through my Mahavishnu project. And he's a fantastic guitarist. He's an educator. He's a jazz historian. He runs the jazz program at Sarah Lawrence College in Bronxville, New York. And I'm very happy to call him my dear friend. He's here to speak with me tonight, and we're gonna get a little loose with things. Glenn Alexander, welcome.
Hey, Greg. So good to be here, man.
Yeah, we're here.
Yeah, man. Yeah, brother. It's
And I
all.
had the pleasure of seeing Glenn's Shadowland band play an outdoor show within the last few days, actually.
Yeah.
And we said, it's about time we recorded one of our conversations, since Glenn and I always usually get into it on a historical, conceptual, musical level. And I'm sure today will be no exception. So, Glenn, do you remember how we first met?
Yeah, I believe if I remember this correctly, it was at that place in, I want to say Fort Lee, that club there. And I wasn't playing there, but I think maybe you were playing, but Andre was there with his Frank Zappa band. God, I feel like that's where it was. And we talked about stuff, and then I knew from other people who you were and about the Mahavishnu thing, and you kind of sounded me about it. But it was interesting because you were I remember that moment. Right? I think that was the first time we met. And you were clear about what it took to do that. I think you knew that I had played a lot with Dave LaRue and done that whole stretch thing and fusoid thing and records and stuff. But I remember that conversation. But it was actually good. It made me think about doing that gig and what was involved, because you really were just like, hey, it's not just playing a gazillion notes and fusion-y sort of thing, and then you explained the concept of Mahavishnu and what you guys were trying to do. I remember you asked me if it was something that I would consider doing. And I remember, so I'm going to share, we're going to go back to the Jocko story and Gil Evans. We're going to get back to that, but because that's priceless. But I'm sharing with you that when I was younger, unlike you and so many people that I know, when I remember when I was in Mahavishnu, cats who heard Mahavishnu when they were really young, 12, 13 years old, and it just turned their world upside down. I didn't have that because I grew up in the middle of Kansas. Um, I mean, we had nothing. We had no culture, no music, no anything. And so I certainly didn't know who Mahavishnu was. And by the time I heard them, I was deep off into other things. I had first gotten into really pretty hardcore straight ahead jazz. And I was deep into the bebop concept. And then, I think somewhere in there, Metheny and of course, Weather Report, blah, blah, blah. And so when I heard Mahavishnu, not really knowing the history, I didn't dig it. I just, it was raw. And of course, because it was so early on and started many of the things that I then was listening to, I didn't totally get it until later. So when you approached me, I'm just sharing with you, when you approached me about that, to be honest, I just thought, wow, I would love to have studied with John McLaughlin. As I got to take some lessons with Pat Martino and some of my favorites. And I just thought, like, this is like the greatest opportunity for me to really get inside his writing and his playing and the depth of that music. So I really took the gig as an educational, obviously, yeah, I wanted to get inside that music. And I thought it would be the greatest opportunity to learn more about that music. And of course I did from you. You knew that music frontwards and backwards. And it was really a healthy and good time for me. And I'm going to share with you this. I gained a tremendous amount of respect for McLaughlin, because here's another thing. Early on, as I said, I was deep into the bebop thing, and those lines, the construction of those lines with the chromaticism, McLaughlin never had that. He didn't play that way.
No.
And then even when I got to Holsworth, he had that, but in a different, wasn't bebop, but it was similar. And that chromatic approach to chord tone sort of thing. And McLaughlin didn't have that. And of course, early on, his thing was very angular and maybe modal and scalier and grew in depth, of course. He was, ridiculous. But so that was another thing. I didn't totally, I didn't get it. And so I gained tremendous, just, respect. I mean, to the fact that he was doing what he did in his 20s. I mean, I knew his music for miles, and you hear all those themes on the Miles recordings, a bit later, of course, then I got to learn. But yeah, Mahavishnu was a great learning experience for me, and it just took it busted my balls big time. As you know, I was often very frustrated. Pretty much every gig, I just wanted to quit. But the band was so great. That's another thing, I mean, I'm just saying, initially, of course, it was Adam Holtzman, and I think Dave Johnson was playing bass. And then we did the things with Jan Hammer, and originally, I think Rob Thomas was playing. We had different violinists. Of course, Zach Brock was in there. We had really great players, but the whole experience was tremendous for me. And the fact, having those cats on board helped me to be able to play that music. It took kind of everything I had to, and I played a lot of odd meter stuff. I mean, on the first Stretch record, I was writing odd meter. We have a tune on there called Percussives, which I named because of the drummer Bruford. He would always list that on his record. So I wrote this tune called Percussives, and in the entire song, there's only one bar of 4/4, and I mean, it has 15, 16, just every 7, 3, 5, everything, but Mahavishnu, that's just another, meeting of the spirits. You got 3 things going on. So and then you're playing in 6, but his pattern on guitar is in 5. I mean, that shit was like, oh my God, that was a tall order for me. Thank you, by the way.
Well, thank you, because in many ways you're my greatest student, because I feel like you so internalized the music, and we've spoken about this before, where clearly there was a learning period for Glenn Alexander, a learning curve maybe to come up to what the music was requiring, but you also have a very professional, sort of thorough ethic of how you're going to make it happen on a gig. And I knew that you had figured out how to not count things,
yes,
but know where everything was.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Absolutely. In fact, I guess, I think for all of us in our musical experiences, I think if you have to count or even think, you're in trouble. And it's not that I didn't work with that music. In fact, I made my own practice tapes of those tunes to get the independence to play in those meters. But I knew that I had no chance if I had to count it. So I would try to work on it enough where I could feel it and hear it and not count. And again, that's what blew my mind about McLaughlin. Terrestrial, that crazy tune, 18, 18, 19. But it wasn't about playing the parts. That never, I'm going to share with you, that's never totally impressed me, how can I say, with anybody. Because I think we can learn parts. But like with Holsworth, what separates the men from the boys is the improvisation. And to hear McLaughlin improvise in that music, and his phrasing is spot to play in 15, and he's never skating. He knows exactly where it is. So that was my focus in trying to, that same thing is to try to feel like I could solo in those meters and play freely and not think and know where it was, And of course, as I said, it makes it easier. I mean, you play that music, and I've said this, and I'm not just stroking you, particularly odd meter music, better than any drummer I've ever worked with in my life. So you had that down, and you made it easy. Like I didn't have to count. You set things up, and I could just hear it. I could hear it coming, and yeah, everybody. That was a good band, great musicians, and that makes it easier. I think in a lesser group, that could have been really challenging.
Well, you came on in 2007, and we recorded this little gem for
yes.
Cuneiform Records. It's a live recording of an entire performance of Visions of the Emerald Beyond by Mahavishnu Orchestra, all the way start to finish in our own interpretation. And we performed it with the full 11 or 12-piece band, depending on where we were. We traveled with it.
Yes.
We played it without looking at the music, and we played it from start to finish as a suite.
Yes.
Sort of pulling together all these different aspects of McLaughlin's writing at that point, and his approaches in different settings, even classical, semi-classical, even like a Webern-esque kind of string quartet, Opus 1 at the end.
Yes.
But then free improvisation with the ring modulator on the way home to Earth, which you and I always got into some nasty business with.
Yes.
So
that might have been my favorite time, and maybe my favorite material. I love the earlier material, Intermounting Flame and blah, 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 that's some chop busting material, but it's the small group, and it is more about the improvisation. And I love this because the writing was so deep, and I feel like it was less chopster oriented for the most part. I love, I played acoustic guitar, and you played hand drum, and that was cool. Yeah, I don't know. That was a beautiful. I mean, it is some beautiful music, and it was fun to play that music with the string quartet, as you just said, the orchestrations and interact and vocals and the whole night. That was probably maybe some of the most rewarding. And I love the other material too. The small group, of course, playing the quintet was extraordinary, and required. That's what I mean. I think more physical playing. But I just. And I remember that's amazing that we made that record. I'm just going to say, people can say whatever they want, but to record that kind of music live.
Oh, yeah.
That's a tall order.
In fact, all the Mahavishnu Project releases are 2-track live recordings, with the exception of the Emerald Beyond, which is live, unedited, but it is mixed.
Yeah.
But we were doing board tapes as our first couple albums for sure, because that's what it is. It's a live experience. It wasn't about, how clean can we be in the studio. It was how raw or how live can we be in front of an audience.
Yes. And, you pointed that out in the group, and that was the consensus of the group, which took, for me, a little pressure off. It's like, okay, and you listen to early Mahavishnu, it's not perfect. Sometimes it's pretty raw, but it was the energy and the moments and what they accomplished in that. And I felt like that was the direction for us on this. And it was still a tall order, but I think I can honestly say I'm proud of that recording, that we pulled that off, and that it sounds amazing. Of course, for all of us, I mean, any of us, I think, I don't know anybody who records something and they go, yeah, that was the shit, and I played my ass off, and it can't get any better. You listen to solos and things, and yeah, of course, it can always be better. And I've never been happy with anything in that regard that I've done. But having said that, overall, and that was just it. I think that music for me was less about a guitar feature and more about the group. The other music is so much of a guitar feature, and that's a tall order, and it puts a lot of pressure on whoever's playing guitar. So yeah, that music is deep and was more orchestrated and took a little pressure off and made it easier for me to do that live recording, you know.
Yeah, and I think my concept too for the large group was that we would even feature the voice more than was on the original recording, and that we would
Yes.
feature flute and horns that may not have been on the original recording for solos, spread it around. There were no keyboard solos on the original album, so I added keyboard solos in places where
Yeah.
there weren't before, sort of putting everybody on equal footing and really exploring the idea of McLaughlin really achieving his chamber orchestra.
Yes. I love that. This is interesting. And it made me think of, has nothing to do with that music, but a similar thing happened for me when I joined Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes. Bobby Bandiera had been in there 24 years, and every song was a guitar solo, guitar feature, guitar. And when I joined, I think it was interesting. It made an opportunity in the band for them to spread things around, and horn players got more solos, and we started mixing it up more. And I think it made the band, frankly, more interesting. And so it's interesting, that recording that we ended up doing. Yes, I remember you directing that and those things and orchestrating it in such a way that, yeah, I feel like it enhanced that music, and everybody got a taste of something in the group, which made it, yeah, it just made it so much fun,
Yeah, I think the fact that you have those forces on stage, you should use them.
Yes. Yes. I mean, yes. And I would have felt silly, to be honest, if it had been, of course, the music is McLaughlin, so it was guitar oriented, of course, and that makes sense. But for me, I think I would have felt silly in that role, standing on stage with, Adam Holtzman and the extraordinary Rob Thomas or Zach Brock or, Prayleak, and just so many, these unbelievable musicians. It was nice to feel like it was a brother and sisterhood. And Melissa Stelianu, I think is her name. Yeah. And, I know we had other vocalists, but she really stood out. Anyway, yeah, it was, and I think that was the right thing to do, and it was the right call, and it made the music bigger in that way,
And it's a big piece. It's a
Yes.
big chunk. I mean, it really is a journey.
Yeah.
McLaughlin loves the album. I think he calls it his favorite Mahavishnu album.
Well, to be honest, I think it's probably is mine as well. Because I'm a sucker for the orchestrations. So I mentioned names before I think we started recording, but I think that was one of the things, even though I heard him many times before, but that why I loved the Pat Metheny group early on is Lyle Mays and his orchestration work. It made that group seem like they were 12 pieces. And I think I've always been attracted to that, early horn bands. And that's, in fact, in Kansas, a lot of what I did. I played in a lot of horn bands, 3 or 4 horns. And so I think it's always been a part of, I like that. Strangely enough, I also had a power trio and still do, with Dave LaRue, but I love the orchestration, and that made that music really special to me. Yeah. And the insanity, the ring modulator piece, and us just going balls out, improvising, like that was so much fun. You don't get to do that every day in front of packed audiences.
It's so true. And I was even speaking to Narda Michael Walden about how extreme the band became. Even on the next album, Inner Worlds, it's like complete noise jams down to acoustic devotional ballads.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
And where are you going to get that? It's that period of time. It's that music. It's those guys. Their idea of spirituality includes extreme physical achievements,
yes,
as well as a kind of meditative quality. And that's got a bit of a curve to it,
Yeah, it runs the gamut, and And yeah, we did. That's what I mean. For you and I, we had moments where I'm playing acoustic guitar and you're playing hand drum, and we're that was also an interesting moment where you and I were improvising together. And then at the same time, later, at some point in the recording, it's you and me, and I've got the ring modulator, and it's just complete insanity.
Yeah. And then, the C pedal comes in underneath that, and we're moving along. But then there's closing chord sequence that just goes in a different tempo
Yes.
from the drum guitar workout, and the kind of tension that forms with it. So you see, even at that point, McLaughlin is utilizing his forces and these concepts to always keep you on the edge of your seat.
Yes, and what I love about that, it to me, it brings back the opening theme, which is in C minor. I can't believe that that's not intentional on his part. However, the subconscious, even in a listener, I think we don't, but hear that maybe, or it doesn't register. But I think that that's important. While this insanity is going on, we have the opening theme that's so rocked out, in C minor, and then at some point in the insanity, that low C drone underneath comes back in, and that's ties it all together. Whether we consciously think about it or not.
Well, I know I eventually came around to this setup, which was I took the ending chords from On the Way Home to Earth, and I just isolated the string quartet to open the concert, looping those chords.
Yes.
Pianissimo.
Yes,
While
I know.
Melissa recited the poem from the album jacket.
Yes.
And then I knew I had achieved the totality of Emerald Beyond, because those chords, when they come back at the end, you heard them, but you thought they were just background chords for her to do the poem.
Yeah.
But then we're in C, then everyone gets a chance to solo over the C drone. Yeah. Everyone's introduced, and then so there's sort of a prelude, an introduction, and then we get to the opening of the performance. And yeah. So making a big deal out of it, I think, was the way to go. You know how it's when something is a big deal, you can either say, well, I can't do that, so let's shrink it down. No, we was like, let's make it.
Yes, I love that. I mean, you expanded it, and everybody was on board with it. And I think I remember that we blew people's minds. I mean, and I think the double CD that you just held up, people should listen to that. I think it's pretty extraordinary. To hear that live was powerful. It was powerful to play it. I mean, in fact, we took that whole group to Sarah Lawrence College and played there. That was extraordinary,
Yeah, I did a pre-concert lecture, as I recall.
Yes. Uh-huh.
This idea of repertoire, Glenn, it's so interesting, because I know as an historian, you would agree that there's so much repertoire that can be used to express our own personal musicality, right? If we're talking about standards, you talked about bebop tunes, certainly that's in there, but the wealth of ballads or show tunes that got turned into jazz tunes, reharms, all this way of treating it as a sort of template for us to improvise,
yes,
us to express, for us to move through these chutes and ladders and hit all the right spots and know where everything is and know what the vibe is, or create our own way of reimagining these things. And I think that was the origin really of the Mahavishnu Project for me in general, was saying, well, there's a Basie band, people are playing Kenton charts, people are playing Ellington charts. Lincoln Center Jazz has, cornered the market on what jazz history repertoire is.
Yes.
So it became a mission for me to say, well, there's also this other jazz rock repertoire that should be performed and should be interpreted and should be approached with reverence, but certainly with our own intentions.
Yes, and I think I love the word that you chose too, and I think that was the goal. I know there were other incarnations of the Mahavishnu Project other than what I was in, but it was a reimagining of that material. And we weren't trying to play it note for note. And I never copied one lick of John McLaughlin's solo. And in fact, I remember speaking to you about that. You were like, no, don't do that. You know, but you do your thing. And that was the cool thing about it. Yes, we were playing those tunes as though they were jazz standards, but we were arranging them and opening them up, and they became vehicles for improvisation for everyone to use their own voice and in that music. It was just a wonderful and fun time. And I think we did it really well. I mean, I have to share with you one of the only reasons. I mean, I love that music and I would still be doing it, but it was such a tall order, and it really was, because let's be honest. I think we had played music from 7 different albums. Even things that had not been released, that Lost Trident Sessions, and of course Jan Hammer, and we were just doing an extraordinary amount of material. And every gig you like to change it up, and so I'm just sharing, and it was great, but it was a tall order for me. Like, I'm like, we got a gig coming up, and it's like, okay, shit, I got to shed all of this material. And at some point I was just like, I've got so many other things I got to do. And this is so, for me to do this right, it was very time consuming. So, but I did it. I think the total time I was in, it was 2 years and a little break, and then another couple of years. I think I did it about 4 years. It was just a tremendous learning experience. I wouldn't change that for anything,
We had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And you became the group's tequila mentor.
Yeah. I like to spread my love and bad habits everywhere.
I remember some large band situations regarding tequila.
Yes, I may have corrupted many individuals. We did a fair amount of that. We had some.
I should say after the shows, folks.
Yes. Well, you couldn't. I could have never even sipped tequila before any of these shows. One of my favorite moments, which is recorded, I think of this. Well, we played BB King's, and that's Diamond Dust. That is up on the internet, clips of it. God, so incredible. But it was the Kensington in PA that we recorded some things. Neil was in the band then, playing Neil Alexander. That was extraordinary. There's some really wonderful footage up online of just those moments. And yes, Zach Brock was on that one particular night. But yeah, there was plenty of drinking afterward.
Yes. I mean, you kind of had to let off some steam afterwards. But I mean, I once at the Bottom Line, when there was always 2 shows per night at the Bottom Line, and that was where we started. We were first accepted as a repertory ensemble by Alan Pepper of the Bottom Line in 2001. And we were playing there, and between the 2 shows, I thought, I'll have a glass of red. Bad idea. I could have a glass of wine between shows.
Oh, yeah. I may have somewhere along the line had a sip of beer or something just to feel like I was taking the edge off. But even that may have been, it was just, music was too challenging. You couldn't handicap yourself. And
no, it's like you can't have a shot of whiskey before you run a marathon.
No, there you go. So
I don't recommend it.
No.
Maybe afterwards if you win the race.
Yeah, if you win the race. And that's
if you finish the race.
Yes, that's kind of how I felt every time. It's like, okay, I got through this. There were some good moments, and then, you had to. I mean, my God, it was like sweating bullets half the time. And so it felt good to hang with the cats. Everybody in the band, we didn't have any teetotalers. So, Dave Johnson, and later Peter Brendler too, and, Neil and Adam, and everybody partook of the refreshments.
The water of life.
Yes. In our wonderful moment, I'll never forget our show with Jan Hammer. That was a highlight. There were many. That was a great moment.
Yeah, we had the day with Jan rehearsing here in my home.
Yes. And another great moment for me, which was towards the end of my time in the group, was our night that we played, or 2 nights, I feel like, or was it 1 or 2 with Alan Holdsworth at BB King's?
2 nights opening for Holdsworth. Yeah.
Yes. And I'm sharing this with our audience out there because in 1985, I had this power trio stretch, and we spent the summer opening some dates for Holdsworth. And one of them was at a place in Columbus, Ohio called Stash and Little Brothers. It was a great music venue, and we were opening for Holdsworth there. And that's where I really got to know him. We had maybe hung out a few times, but that particular night, we're there all day, we're sound checking, we're hanging out, we're eating dinner together. Gary Husband was on it, and Gary, the bass player,
Willis?
Gary Willis was playing bass, yeah. We won't go into any of that, but anyway, so that was, that power trio, we were opening for Holdsworth, and I got to know him then and understand him better. And that is where, in that particular night, I was bitching about my guitar. And I got to share this with you. I didn't even know how a guitar was supposed to play until that night. I had my Fender Strat, which is the wrong guitar to begin with, but I was using that on the Fusion gig. And I had the wrong string. Everything about it. Anyway, I remember feeling frustrated. And this is after the gig, and we're at the bar, and Al and we're just talking about different things. All the fans had gone, which are, God, I used to watch him just glaze over. They would be like, Alan, what gauge pick do you have? And what kind of strings? And, he would just, like, after the third, he was like, oh God. Anyway, so we would go to the bar, and he drank beer all day. And then he would drink scotch. We would start with the real stuff. Long story short, I was whining and bitching about my guitar. He goes, why don't you try one of mine? I go, I'm like, what are you gonna, I was like, okay. He has his roadie go out to the truck and brought in 6 of his Charvels. These are the first ones made.
Charvel.
The very first ones that were handmade for him. And he says, play them. And, tell me what you think. So I play 3 or 4 of them. And the white one, which was his favorite, I said, wow, this is fucking extraordinary. I mean, it was like, this is unbelievable. I didn't even know a guitar could feel like that. And I love this. He just goes, just take it. He goes, take it. And he goes, if you really like it, we had a date, I think, coming up in Texas. He said, we were opening for him there, Oklahoma, I don't know. He said, take it, play it for the next week or so. If you really like it, we'll work something out. He said, I've got, he literally had 6 of them, and long story short, first of all, I'm trying to hang with Alan Holdsworth drinking. Mistake number 1. So after he gives this to me, I'm already pretty lit, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm standing at the bar with him, and I got so toasted that, I get to the point where I knew I was slurring words. I couldn't speak. And I knew Dave LaRue was there. And I forget, we had a roadie at the time. And I just called him over. I said, look, I think I told Dave, I said, you carry the guitar. And I said, the roadie, I said, I'm going to lean on you, and I'm just going to we're going to go outside. You're going to keep me from stumbling, because Alan Holdsworth just gave me this prize Charvel, and it's the white one that's in all of the pictures and that he played on, all of the famous albums. And, anyway, we get to the van, and I literally, they opened the door, and I just did a face plant, passed out. I was so, I woke up the next day, and I'm going like, holy shit, I have this guitar. But so, long story short, it makes me think of when we were at BB King's. I took that guitar in. I don't think I was playing it on the gig at the time. I was using my Music Man. And I took it out of the case, and I showed it to Alan. That was he stood there. His mouth dropped, and he was speechless for like probably a solid minute or 2. And he said, oh my God, it's like seeing an old friend. Sadly, when I got divorced, I needed the money, and I sold that guitar, which it was the best playing. I used the guitar on all my early records. It's on all of my early solo records. It was an extraordinary instrument. And I sold it to, he was a writer. He wrote for a musician. I can't, his name will come to me. Everybody knows his name. And he was an insane Holsworth. In fact, I was playing it because when we played at Iridium, maybe the first time, I was playing that guitar.
Yeah.
And he came to the show. I can't think of his name. He wrote, and he was a Holsworth freak and obsessed with him. And he walked up to me after the show. He said, "You're playing Alan Holsworth's guitar." I said, "Well, Alan gave it to me. It's my guitar." And on the spot, he offered me $20,000 for it. So later, when I needed a divorce, the price kept going up. And finally, I sold it because I just needed the money. I regret it to this day, but it was extraordinary to see Alan, the expression,
Yeah, he really was something. And, I've had Gary Husband on this program and people who have worked with him. And, we stand in awe of that achievement. And
yes. Well, you and I have talked, and I'm going to just make this statement since it's your podcast, that from an improvisational standpoint, in the world of electric guitar, he stood alone. I do not believe anyone will achieve that. I've never heard anyone even get remotely close to that. And when I say that, so many people hear notes, and I can't tell you, thousands of hours, not listening, transcribing and learning Holsworth's material. The harmonic depth of the improvised melodic line is heavier than any guitar player who's ever touched that instrument. And I believe in my mind that I don't believe that I will hear it in my lifetime. Yes, I hear, you got the guys out there that have extraordinary chops. John Petrucci, my God, he probably has more technique than a guitar player alive. And I've heard some really great improvisers. No one. And the other great thing about Holsworth, as we know, it's his voice. He didn't play licks. In fact, that quote, I love that quote, as he said, "If I catch myself repeating something more than 2 or 3 times, I just stop doing it." And yet he played with perfect time at an extraordinary speed. And as I just said, the harmonic depth of his improvisation was insane. Mm-hmm. No, he's a genius. No one, I've never heard anyone, I don't care. I would go toe to toe. I'd argue that with anybody, because if you have ears, if you've spent time, and we know all the keyboard players know it because they can hear, what I'm talking about. And you and I have talked about, we've shared this. It's mind boggling. And I'm going to share with you, much of the time, his music isn't my favorite music. It doesn't totally move me, but the level, but if you can hear what it's insane. It's just, whatever. It's like listening to Wayne Shorter or John Coltrane or Michael Brecker, but Holsworth maybe rolled much of that. And as we've talked about, contemporary classical composers all into what he did. And, it's mind boggling.
Yeah, and I only recently found out that he was a fan of Charles Ives' music.
Yes, we talked about that. Which yes, he absorbed so much.
So much there in terms of stacking fifths or just variation of intervallic studies and just things that Ives came up with, rubbing 2 sticks together pre-Slonimsky. And then you have, Holdsworth coming around and coming up with his own lexicon of scales and note combinations and these things.
Yeah, so those chord voicings, the first time I heard him at the Bottom Line with his IOU band, the first time he brought that band to the United States, and I believe it was 1982 or 3. I can't
82,
remember.
I was there.
Yes. So we were both there. We didn't know each other. I couldn't recognize one thing he was doing. Not a single. I remember leaving there. I was working with Chico Hamilton, I think, at the time, and playing with monster jazz players. And it was so alien to me. I blew my mind. But I'm sharing because you just stated part of what was extraordinary about Holsworth, and that sent me down that path. And I I can't tell you how many hours learning all those types of voicings, is that he would take a basic, just a major 7 chord. But when you voice it in fifths, and he would do that, fifths on the bottom and fifths on the top, it doesn't sound like any major 7 chord you've ever played. So he had that along with the times when he would voice it as a cluster chord. So you get the minor second between 7 and root, and everything was just, and of course he played those same chords, the major 7 voiced in fourths as well. But it was just, they often were chords that we knew, but the way in which he played them on a guitar, I don't care. Never heard it on guitar like that before. And it was alien to me. So on top of his extraordinary single line work, but yes, as you pointed out, his studying, which I love because he didn't read or write music in the conventional sense, but studying those composers because his ears were stupid, and putting that on guitar, wow. That's just once in a lifetime. And what I love, which you and I got to hear, I mean, I heard Holsworth, I think, first time on the record in probably 1975. My brilliant friend, who's one of the most intelligent people I know on planet Earth, Kaz Maslanka, artist, turned me on to him, I think, in 1979. And that was when I first heard him. And I think it was on a Bruford record. Then I heard him on other things, But I just feel like in 1982, you hear a lot of people who are influenced by him, and we hear things. My God, there was just there was nothing that ever happened on guitar like that, and it scared the living shit out of me. I mean, to the point where I felt stupid. I walked out of there, I was scared, and I felt stupid because I couldn't understand what he was doing.
But something was happening.
Yes, I had taken lessons already at that point, with Schofield and Pat Martino. I had played duo guitar with Jerry Hahn. I'd studied the bebop thing, Coltrane, I'd put hours in, and yet it was so foreign and it alienated. It was frightening to me, It was, and still is. So you're going to love this. All those years later, and we opened for him at BB King's. And I remember sitting there thinking for a moment before he started playing that, well, I've grown a lot since then, and I know his music, and I know what's going on, and blah, blah, blah. And I remember sitting there after we played the first night listening to him and just literally wondering why I was bothering playing the instrument. And I really felt like that, sincerely. I just thought, what is the fucking point? That. In other words, it never wore off. It was as extraordinary from the first moment I heard him till the last moment I heard him. And, I don't listen to his music because it's so powerful. I find myself getting sucked into it. And even on some of my recordings, people would say, oh yeah, it sounds like a bad version of Holsworth. And so I stopped listening to him. It's too powerful. And what's his name? The great guitar player, Bill, he's on Seventh Hymn of the Galaxy, Chick Corea.
Bill Connors.
Bill Connor. I just felt bad for him because he got sucked into that. Bill had his own sound and was an extraordinary player, but boy, he took the bait too, just like me and so many others, hook, line, and sinker, and became a bad version of Alan Holsworth. And I feel like it almost ended his career, honestly. And he didn't want to hear that. I said that to him once. I just said, my God, you sound like, you sound extraordinary, but you sound like you've listened to Holsworth. Oh, he threw a fit. He was so pissed off. And that was a moment where I just lost all respect for him. He was in denial that happened, because it did. He went out and got a Charvel guitar and got the Jim Kelly amps. Of course, Alan moved on to some other shit. And he was Bill was so great and a wonderful cat, but man, I don't know. That's the power of Alan Holsworth.
Yeah, it's like the power of Jocko.
There you go. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, I love this. I'm good. I'm back to our story that we started with. Right. So
before we recorded, we were talking about Jocko. Yes.
Yeah. So, and I started because I said, I just had gone out for a run and I'm a sweaty mess. And I said, it made me think of when I used to go to Sweet Basil every Monday night and hear the Gil Evans band. Gil would come running in, just a sweaty stains under the armpits and just, smelling and sweaty, and sit down at the piano with Dean. And that was the first time, I think, when I came to New York, that I heard Jocko, and it was extraordinary. It was before he was gone off the deep end and that sort of thing, and all those great players. And that led us to talking about Jocko. So I also remember this moment. The first time his word of mouth band came to New York, and I believe that was 83. So I'm in some group that I can't even remember, and I'm rehearsing, and down the hallway, Stone Tiger was rehearsing, and that was Percy Jones was playing in Stone Tiger. And Percy Jones, of course, I knew from Brand X, and I was in awe of him because I'm this dumbass from Kansas and I'm new in New York, and I'm rehearsing. And so you're going to love this. The first night, I met Percy just casually because they were rehearsing and I was doing that. The second night, I'm riding the elevator up to go to rehearsal, and Percy steps on. And this was a moment, he was visibly not well. He didn't look good. His head was down, and I said to him, I said, Percy, man, are you okay? What's up, man? You're going to love this. He kind of looked up and he said, there's no point in playing the instrument anymore. There's no point in playing bass any longer. I was like, first of all, I'm going like, this is fucking Percy Jones. And I said, dude, what are you talking about? I mean, I didn't say it, but I want to go, you're like a fucking one of my idols, Percy Jones. And we're riding up to go to he just goes, there is no point for me to continue to play the bass. He said, I went last night. Jocko had played 2 nights at the Savoy Theater with his word of mouth band. He said, I went to hear Jocko Pastorius last night at the Savoy, and he said, I'm quitting. And he did quit. He quit playing for a lot of years. That was so powerful for me. I went up to the rehearsal studio, and Percy said, yeah, he's playing again tonight. If you should go hear it if you can. I went up to the rehearsal studio. I said, I forget, I asked him what time, and whatever time the show was, I said, sorry, I got about half an hour and I'm out. And I don't even remember what the gig was. I didn't give a shit. They could have fired. They probably did fire me. I don't know. I said, I'm going to the Savoy. I got to hear Jocko. And I went, it was almost like the night I heard Holsworth. It was so powerful for me to hear that. That was Jocko was in top form. I will never forget, he was dressed in all white, a suit sort of, that he would wear, those kind of almost like leisure suits. And he had his skull cap on, and the band was full of the baddest cats in the world. All the New York badass cats.
Erskine too.
Erskine was playing drums. Oh my God, the French horn, John Clark, and Randy Brecker. I just and boy, did I get what Percy. I sat there. That was, Jocko was not human. Mm-hmm. I'm telling you. I mean, he would play those tunes from the record. I love the harmonic one, 16th note, that features the French horn. But he did an extended version. He played that 16th note harmonic thing. It went on for 15 minutes. He didn't miss a friggin' note. Meanwhile, he's doing it and walking around the stage and head cueing people. Everything. It was just like the most musical, insane shit. But that was, it made me think of, hearing Jocko, of course, with Gil Evans and all those extraordinary musicians. And then, meeting Percy Jones in that moment where he just said, and that, because we talked about holes, my God, that was like mind blowing.
These were guys who were, created a sea change in the music, and then you could be drawn into them, or you could be inspired by them to try to come up with your own thing. And it was a hard choice, but Jocko's influence to this day, I think, but it has morphed into more of accomplishment in terms of technical achievement on the instrument, exploration of harmonics, treating it as more of a tenor instrument at times than a bass instrument, obviously polyphonic instrument. And so, even Billy Sheehan and guys that come after Jocko and rock, they're kind of driven by this notion that, yeah, the bass can do it too.
Yes.
And then, you have that divide where then there's guys like Alphonso Johnson who are kind of the prototypical foundational bass player, but still keep it interesting and moving.
Yes.
And
Well,
not every music needs a Jocko.
no, exactly. And frankly, there are things that I do now. That's the last thing I want, of course. But like it or not, he single-handedly revolutionized that instrument. And here's another thing I'm going to share with you. Because I heard him several times in the Gil Evans Orchestra swinging his ass off. That cats have done it since, but during that time period, there was no bass player that was copying him that could swing like that. He had some other shit. His feel and his time thing was just deeper because, part of one of the beauties of upright bass, which we know, is that you don't hear every note. You're not supposed to hear every note. It's the ghost notes and it breathes and all that in jazz, which is so important. And so when cats are playing electric bass, like, I don't really like it if I'm playing straight ahead music. But Jocko, I don't care, man. He made it feel better than anyone no one played like that, and he could swing hard, and he had the ghost notes, and it breathed. Yeah, and I love that too. We're just old enough that we got in on, again, the front side of something that no one. Hearing him was like hearing Holdsworth. You had never heard that in your life, and now, again, I know there's just a gazillion players because he was such a massive influence, and they're chopsters and. And we've heard it all, I feel like now. I mean, I don't know how much more can you do, but to hear him and he was so friggin' musical. It was powerful. Yeah, I know it did for you. It changed our lives. The John McLaughlins, the Alan Holdsworths, the Jaco Pastoriuses. I think it would be the same of hearing Albert King for the first time. And having never heard electric blues played like that, or, I don't know, maybe Mike Bloomfield, because long before the British cats were doing that shit, Bloomfield was over here playing searing, nasty ass electric blues, man.
Right.
So there were so many things at that time that we were lucky enough to be on the front side and get to hear, and now it's everywhere. And maybe it does take away from it to a certain degree. I think my students can't really differentiate because they don't. I'm not sure I should expect them to, because Jocko was the first in doing that, and for us it will always be, to me, there's nothing like it. But for them, they don't hear the nuances, and so many came after. I get it, that they don't hear the uniqueness of it, maybe.
And it's interesting to me too, because you work extensively and have for many years worked with the great bassist Dave LaRue.
Yes, and I remember those days because he and I started playing together in 1982. He was massively influenced by Jocko, and I think still is. But Dave, like so many other players, yes, it propelled him to extraordinary, technical heights. But the one thing I love about Dave is that he has made it his thing. I mean, I don't feel like he sounds like Jocko at all, even when we play those tunes. Of course, all those years of playing in the Dregs and with Steve Morris and so many of those great musicians, and even our excursions, that first Stretch record, we were really reaching and experimenting and trying to find our own thing. So Jocko was clearly, just a massive influence for him. But I do think Dave has moved into, and he would be the first to say, of course, it was and it is still. But I don't think, in my mind, he doesn't sound anything like Jocko, but it certainly propelled him to those heights,
It's funny because I would even just credit.
Please, can you close this door for me? Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
I would just singularly credit Jocko for the notion of articulation. The electric bass.
Oh, absolutely. I love that. You just said what I was trying to, in him playing swing music. That's what made it feel so it was the articulation, you know. I just watched for the how many times I've watched it, Joni Mitchell Shadows and Light tour.
Metheny, Brecker,
Oh my God.
Lyle Mays.
Oh, and Jaco, no one plays even a single remotely questionable note. It's insane. And I remember, here's another one, because we talk about Holsworth and the greatness of Jaco. They're from another galaxy. I remember Pat Metheny saying when they showed up to rehearse, Jaco was the MD and he never showed up. Pat Metheny said they rehearsed for a week working on the material and Jaco wasn't there.
Oh.
And he said he showed up to the first gig. And Metheny has said that it was like the same thing when you read Miles's book, and he talks about rehearsing the band for the Charlie Parker in New York for 52nd Street. And he said, I rehearsed the band all week and Parker never showed up. And he spent the entire week, and they showed up to the gig and Parker was nowhere to be found. They literally are on the bandstand getting ready to start, and here comes Parker waltzing through the door. And Miles says in his book, he proceeded to Miles just said, you know, that was another moment where it was so insane that he blew everyone off the bandstand. And Miles just stood there and said, yes, he's a genius. It was clear. And Pat said that about Jaco. It was like he knew everything frontwards and backwards, and just assumed, I guess, those guys would take care of business, showed up, bang, play the gig, killed it.
He had been with Joni for a couple of years already at that point.
Yeah, so he didn't, when they went on that tour, he just felt like whatever he was into or had going on, I ain't gonna show up. Yeah, I'm the MD. You guys figure it out.
It's interesting that you bring up Bird, though, because not only does Jaco sort of represent a revolution on the instrument the way Bird did,
yes,
with the alto and bebop, but he starts his first solo album with Donna Lee, yes, to sort of say, hello,
yes,
this is the kind of connection I'm making here. Now we can do this on the bass.
Yes, which I love that. And of course, now there's, as you know, there's so much controversy about that tune. Miles says he wrote it, and I can believe that. Miles swears that he wrote that. That's his song. But regardless, I mean, it's a Charlie Parker tune, as we know it, and Charlie Parker recorded it. And yes, I love that.
Well, as an historian, Glenn, what do you think that's possible that Miles
took
credit, or that he wrote it?
I think it's possible that he wrote it. And the same way that Bill Evans wrote Blue and Green and so many things that he did not get credit for on Kind of Blue. I think Miles was young then, but I don't know. It is close to the way Parker writes. I mean, it's really, really similar, and I think it would be hard to, but I don't know. I don't see any reason for Miles to even though of course they're all boastful, but it's the same thing that he did to so many people. And he did it to, everybody. People wrote things, and he just took credit for it. And I think in his credit, I do know that for a fact that Charlie Parker did that on several records. They recorded it and he just left the studio. They didn't know who did what. I think it's entirely possible they just assumed that he wrote it. And, so I don't know. I do think it's possible. A thing that I'll say about Miles is that, of course, we know that when he first started playing and on that first album with Charlie Parker in 1945, which is extraordinary. People somehow think when on Charlie Parker's first solo record, Miles Davis is playing trumpet. And of course, Dizzy Gillespie comes in and plays piano on one tune, and I think he plays trumpet on one thing. But, because Parker had left the set anyway. I won't go into all that, but Miles clearly didn't have his ability together in that same kind of bebop way at that time. However, his ears were extraordinary, and for him to say, which he says in his book, that he was bored out of his mind at the Juilliard ear training class. Now, let me just say, if you're bored at a Juilliard ear training class, you can hear some shit. I mean, it'd be one thing to say, yeah, I was at a lower level ear training class at the new school or something, and I was pretty bored at Juilliard. And he just said I was miserable. You know, he said I could hear everything already. I think his ears were really good, and he was studying hard. I think it's possible that he wrote Donnelly, which did come not on that session, but later. Yeah, I don't know.
What's the composer? I mean, that's an interesting topic because he always had people around him that could compose.
Yes, but he wrote some pretty cool bebop heads. Even Half Nelson. Of course, we know it's based on Lady Bird, but he had the chromaticism. There are several several of those that he wrote that are really great bebop heads.
Did he write
oh yes. Oh wait, what is that? I can't think of what that is.
Is that called Milestones?
Oh, there it is. So there's two milestones. And he wrote both of them. The second one's a modal tune, which is on the 1958 recording, which which belonged on. I'm just going to share with you. I feel like if Teo had his shit together, how would he know though that Miles was going to do the next record? That should have been pulled from that 1958 Milestones record and put on a kind of blue record. That's where it belonged. Because it's sort of out of character for everything that's on, the Milestones record. But yes, the first Milestones, you just sang it. It's a beautiful bebop tune. And he wrote several, many of them, which is another reason I really think that Donnelly, he may have written because of the changes, although Parker did that too. He didn't write the chord changes. The chord changes are back home in Indiana. And, there were so many of those tunes like that. I don't know, but yeah, that's a great bebop head, Isn't it funny? And then he writes a modal tune later and attaches the same title to it.
Recycling.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk to you about your solo music because I think more people need to check it out. And is it possible that the early Stretch stuff and the early Glenn Alexander stuff that was, I think, on Palmetto, or am I thinking of a?
Well, my first solo record came out on a label out of California called Chase Music Group, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find it. It may be up digitally. I can't remember if I checked, but there are still some CDs. I see them come out. Actually, when that first came out, that's how old I am. It only came out on vinyl. And then literally 2 years later or a year later or something, they put it out on CD. So that was on Chase. And then the next two records I did were for Shawnee. Yeah. And then I did the Oriah record for Palmetto. The Stretch record is just on it was a label out of Philly because they owned the studio we recorded at called Half Track Records. And that I don't even know that we ever distributed that on, I don't even know this. Like, in other words, I've never tried to do that. If I put it in on Spotify or any of the digital formats, I don't know that it comes up, because for many years that was only available in vinyl, and only maybe a dozen years ago we pressed CDs. We added a tune to it and pressed CDs. So yeah, that, it's interesting. That was my early life, all that instrumental music, and I loved that. And I'm going to share with you the reason why I aborted that is I signed a huge management deal. I'll think of his name. He was the biggest manager in all of jazz. Tanya Maria was his wife. And what is his name? He was a French guy. Anyway, I signed a management deal at sort of the height of the Shawnee thing. And because that record sold 25,000 copies and I was getting airplay all over the world. And it was going great. And I was touring with my own band. Manolo Badrino was in it. And blah, 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 blah. I signed a deal with him, a 3-year deal. And he wanted me to be a CD 101 jazz guy. And he didn't tell me that when we signed the deal, So I signed the deal, and basically our relationship starts with, he goes, you know, I want you to write a bunch of stuff and demo it and send it to me, and I'm going to get you a major record deal, you know, other than these small independent things that you've been on. And I wrote tunes and sent them to him, and he just kept rejecting them. And about 6 or 8 months into it or something, you know, wasn't very long, actually, probably 6 months. I sent something in, and on the phone, he goes, "Nah, dude, you're missing the mark. You know, it's not commercial enough." He kept saying that. I want to keep watering it down. So then he goes, "Come in, and you and I are going to write together." So this is how that went on the phone, which I can't say I regret. I did the same thing with Shawnee Records and my other labels, which is why I was on a different label for every record. Is I said, "Hey, how about you take this whole thing and shove it up your ass? Because you're the manager and I'm the musician, and I'll do the writing. And no, we're not going to write together, and we're finished." However, he wouldn't let me out of my contract. And literally, I had some gigs in New York. He literally had lawyers show up to take a cut from my gigs. He came after me every year on my tax returns. I could not record any jazz music, and I just couldn't play. He just kept coming after me, he tried to take 20% of my income because I was signed to give him that, but we weren't working together, and he didn't book anything. It was a fiasco. And I got so depressed, I quit playing jazz. I didn't play any for the remaining 2+ years. I stopped recording. I had a deal sort of hanging with Palmetto, but I couldn't do it because of my contract with this asshole. So I got so depressed. I quit playing music for a little while, and I just didn't know, you know, and I remember thinking, what made me want to start playing music, you know? And it was the Allman Brothers, and it was Leonard Skinner, and it was Mike Finnegan, and it was ZZ Top. And that is when I started writing everything that frankly is on the fairly recent LAX record. All of those songs I started writing then. And I never went back. I recorded that Palmetto record, and I did some joint efforts with Scott Healy and the Coalition and other things, but I just didn't pursue the solo instrumental thing anymore. So, which is why that's what my Shadowland band, you know, that's a sound that I heard that from Mike Finnegan before I left Wichita. That's really what that sound is. It's almost like, you know, some Ray Charles and Mike Finnegan, and you know, that's what I currently am doing. I love that music. And so I went back to it in the 90s. I guess that would have been about 93. And I did a tour of that music in 96 in Australia. The Music Man promoted, and it was Dave LaRue and Van Romain and I playing some instrumental stuff, and then those vocal tunes. Yeah. I don't know. And I'm sharing with you, man, I lost my whole fan base. People didn't dig it. In fact, Bill Milkowski, who's been a friend of mine my whole life, he won't even hardly speak to me. He won't. Yeah, he was pissed off. He was like, he just thought I was, I don't know, selling out or doing something. Yeah, I lost my entire fan base.
But people don't necessarily know what it's like to navigate the waters of instrumental music in any genre and actually achieve audience recognition, financial gain, and what it takes in a non-vocal setting to reach an audience. And so people at that time you're speaking of, I think, were very judgy, smelling some money coming. You mentioned CD 101. I don't even know if our audience would get that reference, but it was smooth jazz, if you will. And so Metheny occupied a certain territory in that area, and I think people were smelling that, blood in the water. But even Metheny, when he did one too many slash chords on, I think it was Imaginary Day for the single he had, they wouldn't play it on CD 101. So he reached the wall.
Yes.
So it was.
And his thing was always a cut above. He just played so melodic, and his tunes are melodic, that he could get away with it. But I love that. Some of the things that he got airplay on at the time had this underlying polyrhythmic Brazilian thing going on, but no one could really even hear that. And they just heard the upper parts. And yeah, that was a kind of a dark period, that's how I got signed to the management, because my Rainbow's Revenge record, which Shawnee put out, got an extraordinary amount of airplay all over the world, 400 stations. I remember that, syndicated in Japan. And, and of course I was excited about it. I sold a lot of copies of that record and toured, but just as you said, then those around you who want to make you, Kevin Eubanks, I'll never forget that happened to him. Thank God he ended up with that Tonight Show gig, and so he made an extraordinary living. And he was signed, I think it was GRP, and they dropped him. And I remember hearing him, talking to him about this, and he literally said this, and he told them that. I know he did, because they wanted him to be more, you got to be more commercial, blah, 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 blah. And so at one point they called him and said, we're dropping you because you didn't sell enough units. And this is exactly what Kevin said. I love this. He goes, no, I play the music and write the music. You didn't sell enough units, so go fuck yourself. And it was the same thing. It's like, I don't sell the units. That's your job. You're the record company. I make the music.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's, how it works with record companies. So they dropped him, and, that happened to me. Yeah, I don't care. I don't regret it at all. Everything happens for a reason, but I agree with you. That's a hard world to survive in and make a living, So, now I'm making a living.
Well, of course,
play fewer chords.
Yeah, fewer chords, fewer notes.
Fewer notes.
You and I are both involved with music education, and I know we definitely spend our time griping about it. But I have to say, I feel a certain amount of satisfaction in just getting 20% of my students interested in something other than what's given to them on corporate radio.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you're, yes, we've spoken about it, and I do agree with you. And it also keeps our head in the game and keeps us fresh, I think, on a certain level, or at least things that I would let go. Maybe, teaching jazz theory for me. I mean, I know, sadly, at this point, everything that's in the Mark Levine book, and then that's been healthy for me. To have to, it's one thing when you play it, but have to talk about it and lay it out and give it to someone. And yeah, I think it's a healthy experience for us, and also healthy in the rewards, in that even if a handful get it, and you know what, I got to tell you, this past year, I taught a new class at Sarah Lawrence I'd never taught before. And it was called The Blues and Beyond. I've always taught jazz history. And so I started in the same place. Of course, you start with slavery when it first starts, 1619. And I said, blah, blah, blah. And out of, we arrived at the blues. So that whole history leading up to that. But I got to share with you, this might have been one of the most rewarding teaching years of my life, because one of the parts of that class, I mean, we do all blues from the first recordings, and Delta blues, and the whole 9 yards, and country blues, and I won't start going into the names, but we do all of that. But my whole point of that course was, then at the semester we start early on, because we take those tunes and we look at, I don't care if it's Cream or if it's Jimi Hendrix, or, we can go on and on, or, Elvis Presley for that matter, whatever, recording these early blues tunes. And I morphed in the second semester, was all into, now we're into Led Zeppelin and the Beatles and all these British cats. My students so got it. Because of that, because they love Led Zeppelin and they love the Beatles and they love Cream, and they're into all that. And so now they got and they got it, and they loved and listened to all the early blues, and then they loved Albert King and B.B. King and Freddie King and blah blah. And I don't know that I've ever had that. I feel like 100% of my class got a lot of it. And that's never happened. So it was, yeah, it made me feel better about teaching.
Well, but when we have the ability to develop our own curricula and are able to develop the through line and sort of simplify and clarify, demystify, I like to say,
Yes.
where does it come from? How does it get there? And what is it? And then when it gets there, what is it?
Yeah.
So there's so much that you can even hear it in the blues because you're working with a sort of finite palette.
Yes. Well,
right?
yes. And that's just, my students use that word all the time, everybody does. Oh, this is so soulful. But then when I was able to point out from the blues, from African music, the African influence, and then African American, what that means. In other words, what does it, and when you start, and Billie Holiday had it, Louis Armstrong, it's in the time and it's in the placement and it's in stuff that you could never write out with our current system. It's impossible. You can't do it. And that was extraordinary. I spent hours painstakingly going over that and analyzing the blues. And I'm going to share with you, the blues for me at this point is one of the deepest musics that's ever happened. And I think the most extraordinary phenomenon in all that's ever happened in Western music, because it's so misunderstood. It is not the 1-4-5 progression. We say that, I get it, but so that we can have an easy way to talk about it that relates to Western music. But if they're all implied dominant chords, which they are, it can't be the 1-4-5. This is what's extraordinary. I do this to my class. I ask my class to find one chord progression that's only 12 measures long that you can play over and over and over for hours on end and not tire of it. So far in 25 years, no one's found anything yet. And that's because of the extraordinary phenomenon about the blues it's all dominant chords. It's not one key. It's dominant chords from 3 different keys. And your resolution chord, which is your starting chord, never resolves because it's a dominant chord. And then you couple that with, and we can go back to the first blues things recorded and field hollers and blah, blah, blah. Major chords, dominant, with minor melodies happening over. Show me in Western music when that happened. Doesn't exist. And now we break it down further into, okay, they talk about the blue notes. That's what we're talking, yes. But it's not that either, because they're not singing or playing major thirds or minor thirds because they're bent. They're somewhere in between that they never get to one way or the other. Same with the fifth, same with the seventh. It's microtonal. And it's nothing but tension, which is why you can play it all night long and you never tire of it. I've come to realize it being one of the most extraordinary forms of music. When I was younger, I just thought it was stupid because it's 3 chords and it was simple. And then therein again lies the genius. These cats who have a limited palette, and yet through the microtonal aspects and the rhythms, and they all develop their own voice and play shit like you. I mean, Albert King doesn't sound anything like B.B. King, who doesn't sound anything like Freddie King. It's extraordinary. So I mean, I love this. You and I are talking, but in that particular class, I was allowed a long period of time to point that out and play things for those students. And they got it. They finally got it. They understood. And that's the difference. That's what makes something soulful or not. It's the pitch, it's the placement of the notes in the rhythm. It's all those things which Billie Holiday never thought about and Louis Armstrong never thought about. And it's all African derivative. It's so deep, it's massive. And I love that you and I, we talk. We're recording this, but you and I talk all the time about this kind of shit.
Yeah. Yeah, we do. Yeah, you've been a constant companion in terms of the thought that goes behind all of this history, and someone who really cares about when things happened and why they happened in music, who the underrated people are and who the overrated people are, and really a kind of wide range of musical experience that I find very few, particularly guitar players, maybe can grasp. And another thing that you did, which I wanted to mention to people, is that you worked on the Paul Simon guitar transcription book. Did you not?
Yes, I recorded all of that material. Going back to your previous, I just want to say, yes, I love sharing the same thing you just spoke about, and you have a more in-depth, frankly, a knowledge of so much of that, way beyond me, and that's what I love about a relationship. The history of jazz and blues and classical music that you know so well. So yeah, I always feel like I learn from you, and I enjoy our relationship. We get to share that, yes, and I do. But yes, that was a really, okay. I love this. I remember saying to you that I took the Mahavishnu Project because I wanted to learn that music, and rather than going and taking lessons from someone, whoever that would be, or that seemed like the best way to learn it. So that's what happened on the Paul Simon thing. I had auditioned for Paul for his band, and I didn't make it. The long-haired guy, he's a really great. He ended up in the band. I can't remember. I'm losing my mind. But he's an extraordinary musician, and he got the gig. I went to a couple of auditions, a couple of times that I played with Paul, so he knew who I was. But I was teaching with Howard Morgan, the great fingerstyle guitar player, and Howard was giving Paul lessons. And somewhere in their relationship, he asked Howard to arrange 14 of his songs, I think, or something, for solo jazz guitar, because Paul is a avid jazz guitar buff, studied with Howard, is always working on it. I mean, frankly, I don't think he probably will ever play jazz necessarily, but it has enhanced his chord vocabulary and his facility and all that sort of thing. So he was studying with Howard. Anyway, so Howard arranged those tunes, and then time goes by and blah, 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 blah. And at some point, Paul came to him and said, I want to release these. I've got a publishing deal. They're going to, print that music, your arrangements and the tablature, and I want to put them out. And Howard was in the middle of doing, I think, a Duke Ellington book or something else. And he had a deal with a company. He had to, a deadline, and he had to do that. And Paul was just insistent on doing this. So he just said, Paul, I can't do this. I can't do it. I don't have time. And Howard said, I teach at the New School with this guy, Glenn Alexander. I think he's your guy. And Paul said, oh, I know him. He auditioned for my band. And so that was another moment where I just thought, I love Howard, and his teaching method was amazing. But often we have this, people we work with, colleagues, we so appreciate them. I'm like that with you. If I had time, I'd study with you. I thought about that with Howard. I said, if I could, I'd study with Howard, but I don't have time. I can't do that. Here we go. He calls me, he goes, will you do this? And it was like, I thought literally for about 10 seconds, I thought, I've always wanted to study with Howard. How better to learn his concept behind his arrangements and all these extraordinary voicings than to take this gig. So, but you're going to love what first happened is that the company, I think it was Shermer or somebody, they called me and they go, okay, we want you to do this, and we're sending you the music. And it was Howard's original. They hadn't even been printed out yet. It was his handwritten manuscript, 185 pages of music. And they go, yes, we'd like to have this in 2 weeks. That was a moment. And I think I had the music at that point. I looked at it and I just called him. I said, no, that is not. And I just told him, I said, if you know somebody that you think you can find that can learn all this and do this in 2 weeks, have at it, because it ain't going to happen. I can't do it. I don't think anybody can. And they also lowballed me. So I had them add, I think, another $3,000 to the project, and at least another, I think, 2 or 3 weeks. I feel like maybe I did it in a month or 5 weeks or something, but it was still a tall order. My God, but again, I did it. It wasn't really about the money, although I knew I would have to devote my time exclusively to that. So I demanded a fair amount of money because, I couldn't do anything else other than my teaching shit or something. Yeah, it was that was another one with just ball busting. It was like joining Mahavishnu. It was like, oh God, what have I gotten myself into?
Well, tell me this though, as a guitarist, is Paul Simon a good guitarist?
Oh, I think Paul is extraordinary at what he does. And what I mean by that, the times that we sat, he plays in this, finger style, kind of maybe a bit of a Travis picking sort of way, but other things kind of hybrids of the Merle Travis, which is the basis for all that music. But he just does that. It's like James Taylor. He does it so effortlessly, like he's not even playing, and every note is perfect and it's beautiful. And for me, yes, I think, like I would say about JT, my God, he's he's just so great at that. It's undeniable. I mean, is Paul, as I said, he learned a lot of chord voicings from Howard. I don't think he could probably play a single one of those arrangements. I doubt. Maybe he could, if he worked at it. I don't want to. I'm certainly not trying to put him down, because yes, I think he plays really, really well at what he does, and he's just so good at it. And he studied with everybody. I'm just sharing with you. I've known 3 or 4 of his teachers. Of course, I knew Howard Morgan well. He studied with Woody Mann, the great monster fingerstyle player, Woody Mann. He studied with Fred Winston, who was one of my colleagues at the New School, as was Woody Mann, and somebody else that he studied with that I know. So Paul has studied his whole life. I respect that. And JT also took lessons with Howard Morgan. I love those cats. They're always trying to learn. They may not ever do anything other than what they do, but they're always trying to expand their palette, which I totally respect. I mean, Christ, they got hundreds of millions of dollars. They don't have to do that.
That's true.
I'm 100 there.
Tell me what you're up to these days, Glenn.
I'm working. Current right now this summer. Within the next month, I'm trying to finish 3 albums. I'm working on my daughter Oriah, her solo album, second one.
Great singer.
Yes, she's such a great singer and writes really well. We write some together, and then some of they're literally just her tunes, and I try to take her vision and produce it, and she she's there the whole way. In mixes, she's really clear about things. If I'm doing something stupid, she tells me, and so we work together on that. Man, I really like it. It's a different head, it's alternative, or as I sent to the publisher of Downbeat magazine, what's his name, Frank, and he said, well, it's not jazz and it's certainly not pop. He said it's sophisticated pop, which is a tough niche, to fit into. But so I'm finishing that album this summer. I'm working on, we have a group together called Blue Americana. I've got about 8 tunes done for that and trying to wrap that up. And I'm finishing the 3rd Shadowland album, which same deal. I've got about 8 or 9 tunes almost done. I'm so close. So I'm trying to finish those up. And as soon as those are done, then I will start working on the next LAX record with Dave. So yeah, I'm always writing. I don't know why, to be honest. There's no money in it, I mean, and I probably will, this will be the last Shadowland album I do. I'm not getting any younger, and I can't afford to spend money on it anymore. And there's no return in that. I mean, so I won't do another. This will be the last Shadowland album. Oriah has a little deal with Pacific Records out of California. So hopefully that will lead to other things. We'll be doing more of that. But, I don't know what retire means, but I can't keep spending money on music with no return, So.
Well, I don't see you retiring, but I see you finding a way to keep things afloat, as we all do, because we have to make music.
Yes. Well, yes. Thank you. We do. We have to make music. Otherwise, What? You
Who
know,
said without music life is pointless?
I don't know who said that.
I think Oscar Wilde. I can't remember who it was, but it's a good one.
It could be, but I got to share with you. Now, this is going back 20 years, and it was in the kind of dark period for me when I had no intentions of recording again. And I was at the new school and I was walking out, and I had not yet worked with Adam Holtzman. And at that point, all I knew, he was Miles MD, and I'd met him there and seen him play, and we're walking out, and I, talking about something and blah, 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 blah. And I think at that time I may have said, if I do another record, maybe, I would love for you to produce it. Yeah, okay, great. Then I saw him several years after that. And I think it was right before Mahavishnu, he handed me like a new CD. And I remember I just said to him, well, why are you doing this? Because I knew that there was just, the whole record deal thing had gone in the toilet. Everybody was producing their own music, spending money on it. He was, and I thought it was pointless. And I just said, why are you doing this? And he looked at me, like he just looked at me and looked me straight in the eye. And he just goes, because that's what we do. We make music. It was like a moment. He didn't elaborate, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, what else are we going to do? You can't think about the return. We are conscious of what it costs, but you just said it. I mean, what are we just going to stop? No, I'm not going to play anymore. I'm not going to write anymore, and I'm not going to record anymore. I don't think so.
No,
but I'm going to stop spending thousands of dollars on doing this,
And Glenn, where can people find out all about you and your website and info site?
Yeah, well, my website is just my name, and that's probably the best place. It's just Glenn Alexander, Glenn with two N's, glennalexander.com. And all my projects and things go up there, even though there are other sites, for my other things. You can find everything there and then go to those other sites. That's probably the easiest central location. And yeah, I mean, look, I love this, and hey, I hope people come on board and support it, and we all try to do that for each other, to keep the music alive. But yeah, I'm going to rock hard I'm sharing with you about another 4 or 5 years, and then I'm going to start to slow down quite a bit.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, I intend to go full tilt. I mean, I work 7 days a week. I rarely take time off, and I intend to keep doing that for a few more years.
Well, we're going to look for all these new albums, Glenn, and I have to say just how much I value our friendship and our rapport and what we've accomplished musically together. And I encourage all the Mahavishnu fans that know Glenn from our work together to check out Glenn's work in all the bands that he's in. Just such a wealth of musicality and range, and he's just one of my favorite people, and we love hanging out, and we love shooting the breeze and talking music. So Glenn, thank you so much for this time, man.
Well, everything you said, and I as you just said so sincerely, and I feel the same way, exactly. I mean, you enrich my life. I have the people in my life that they inspire me. They keep me going. I love that we get to share, and we often do, but there's never a time that I leave a conversation that I don't feel inspired, or you'll bring up something that I'm unaware of, or talk about something. And I only have just very few people, handful in my life, so I value, yes, our friendship and our relationship and the musical things that we share and have shared, and that I'm sure we will going forward.
Yes, I hope we will.
Thank you for having me. I mean, this is so much fun, Thank you.
I know it's the blast. Everybody, thank you for listening. My guest has been the great Glenn Alexander, and check out our music on the Mahavishnu Project, Return to the Emerald Beyond, and anything you can find on YouTube of Glenn with us with the Mahavishnu Project. These are exemplary situations where the music of John McLaughlin is brought to a different place in the current day. And, you know, John's not playing that music anymore, so we still do it with the Mahavishnu Project. And I've had such a joy speaking with my buddy from the Mahavishnu Project, one of the honorary members, Glenn Alexander. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Greg. It's an honor.
My honor. Thanks,
Yep.
buddy.
See you, brother.